The September heat was breaking when Sheriff Elias Holt found her at the depot, sitting alone on the horsehair bench like a ghost of something lost. 24 years wearing the badge had taught him to recognize trouble. But this woman clutching a worn medical bag with faded gold lettering carried a different weight. "Last train's gone, ma'am," he said, noting her refined speech contradicted the dust on her traveling dress. "I know." Her skilled hands trembled from exhaustion, not fear. "I bought a ticket but couldn't board." "Where were you heading?" "Nowhere particular." The station master's lantern flickered. The Western Union telegraph clicked its endless rhythm. Elias studied her guarded eyes, seeing something he recognized, the look of someone running from injustice, not crime. "Sage Creek has a boarding house," he offered. "Town lost its doctor 3 months back." She stiffened at the word doctor. "Ma'am, this town could use someone who carries healing instead of harm." Her fingers tightened on the bag's brass clasps. "Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story." The walk through Sage Creek revealed a town holding its breath against the coming darkness. Margaret studied each storefront, Hartley's Mercantile with its gleaming windows, the Sage Creek Clarion newspaper office already shuttered, and most notably, a doctor's office standing dark and dusty, its shingle creaking in the evening breeze. "That's been empty 3 months now," Elias said, following her gaze. "Dr. Morrison took fever himself. Didn't make it." Margaret's fingers tightened on her medical bag, but she said nothing. The boarding house stood 2 stories tall, painted white with green shutters, a civilized beacon in the frontier twilight. Mrs. Adelaide Brennan answered on the second knock, a woman of 60 with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. She took in Margaret's dusty traveling dress, the expensive leather bag, the educated way she held herself despite obvious exhaustion. "Sheriff Holt," Adelaide said, her voice carrying Boston breeding softened by 20 years of Western practicality. "And who might this be?" "Mrs. Brennan. This is Miss." Elias paused. "Winters," Margaret supplied quietly. "Margaret Winters." Adelaide's sharp gaze moved between them, noting Elias's protective stance, Margaret's defensive posture. "Come in, then. We'll discuss arrangements." The parlor smelled of lavender sachets and beeswax polish. A daguerreotype of Adelaide's late husband in Union blue watched from the mantel. The ticking of a grandfather clock marked time as Adelaide named her rates fair but firm. "I can manage a week," Margaret said, counting coins with careful precision. Elias caught Adelaide's eye, a silent communication passing between old friends. "Mrs. Winters will be staying as long as needed," he said. "I'll guarantee the difference." Margaret stiffened. "Sheriff, I don't accept charity." "Not charity," Adelaide interrupted, studying Margaret with newfound interest. "That's no ordinary bag you're carrying, Miss Winters. The way you hold it, like it contains something precious. Medical instruments, perhaps?" The silence stretched taut. Margaret's knuckles whitened on the leather handles. "I've observed treatments," Margaret said carefully. "Nothing formal." Adelaide made a sound that might have been disbelief but chose not to pursue it. "Your room's upstairs. Clean linens, wash basin, view of the mountains. Breakfast at 7, dinner at 6. Yo." As Adelaide led Margaret upstairs, she whispered to Elias, "That's no saloon girl nor farmer's wife, Sheriff. What trouble follows her?" "The kind that comes from healing in a world that sometimes punishes goodness," Elias replied, his voice low. "She needs sanctuary." "Adelaide." "Then sanctuary she'll have, but secrets have a way of surfacing. Elias. Best you remember that." The midnight hour had passed when Elias completed his rounds, the town sleeping save for the saloon's dying piano and a coyote's distant call. He expected darkness at the boarding house, but found Margaret on the porch, wrapped in Adelaide's spare shawl, studying the vast September sky. "Can't sleep?" he asked, settling into the adjacent rocker with the practiced quiet of a man who'd learned not to startle. "The stars are different here," she said, not looking at him. "Clearer. In Chicago, the factory smoke and gas lamps steal the night sky. You know the constellations." It wasn't a question. Her educated bearing had already told him much. "My father taught me. Before—" She stopped herself, fingers tightening on the shawl. "Before things changed." Elias disappeared inside, returning with a speckled tin coffee pot and 2 cups. The lucifer match flared briefly as he lit the porch's kerosene lamp, trimming it low enough to preserve their view of the stars while casting gentle light across their faces. "Coffee helps with long nights," he said, pouring the bitter brew. "Learned that during the war." "Which side?" Margaret asked, accepting the warm cup gratefully. "Union. Though out here, that matters less than you'd think. We've got former Confederates and Union men working side by side. Survival makes brothers of former enemies." She sipped carefully, considering his words. "And justice, does that also bend to frontier necessities?" "Justice and law aren't always the same thing," Elias replied, his voice thoughtful. "Seen plenty of legal things that weren't just, and just things that weren't legal. A sheriff learns to navigate that divide." Margaret's hands stilled on her cup. "That's a dangerous philosophy for a lawman." "Maybe. But I've been doing this since '61. Started as a deputy at 19, right after—" He paused, something shifting in his weathered face. "My wife passed 8 years ago. Fever took her. Dr. Morrison was traveling to Denver for supplies. By the time he returned, Sarah was gone. Sometimes I wonder if someone with real medical knowledge could have saved her." The weight of unspoken understanding settled between them. Margaret's fingers traced the rim of her cup, and when she spoke, her voice carried careful neutrality. "Fever can move quickly, even with the best care." "You sound like someone who knows," Elias observed gently, before Margaret could respond. The night shattered with a child's strangling cough and a woman's desperate cry. The Hartley house, 3 doors down, erupted in lamplight and panic. Elias was already moving, Margaret close behind. They found chaos young Tom Hartley, barely 4 years old, fighting for each breath with the distinctive bark of croup. His mother, Ellen, clutched him helplessly while his father, James, stood frozen with terror. "He can't breathe," Ellen sobbed. "Started an hour ago. Getting worse." Margaret took 1 step forward, then forced herself back into shadow, but Elias had seen it, the instinctive reach of a healer, the diagnostic sweep of her eyes cataloging symptoms, the unconscious shift into medical authority. "The child needs steam," Margaret said quietly from the doorway, her voice carrying despite its softness. "Build a tent with muslin over his bed, boiling water underneath. Add peppermint oil if you have it." "Who?" James Hartley began, but Elias cut him off. "Just do it. Now." Margaret continued, still in shadow, but her voice gaining strength. "Elevate him 45 degrees. The angle matters. Keep the steam constant but not scalding. If you have honey, mix it with warm water, just drops on his tongue between coughing fits." Ellen Hartley flew into action, her panic channeling into purpose. Within minutes, they'd constructed a makeshift steam tent using sheets and chairs. The mercantile owner, roused by the commotion, provided peppermint oil from his store. Margaret never entered the room fully, but her quiet instructions guided every movement. "Why isn't she helping directly?" James demanded. "Fear making him aggressive." "Because you haven't asked her to," Elias said simply. "And because sometimes the best help comes from those who know when to step forward and when to stay back." 20 minutes later, Tom's breathing eased. The barking cough softened to occasional spasms. Color returned to his small face. Ellen Hartley wept with relief while James pumped water for more steam with shaking hands. "How did she know?" Ellen whispered, looking toward the doorway where Margaret had been. But Margaret had vanished, melting back into the night. Elias found her on the boarding house porch, hands trembling not from cold but from the effort of restraint. "You wanted to help directly," he said. "It wasn't accusation, just observation. Want and wisdom are different things. Sheriff," her voice carried bitter experience, "a woman with medical knowledge draws attention, the wrong kind. The Hartleys won't talk. I'll see to it." She looked at him then, searching his face in the lamplight. "Why would you do that?" "Because I know what it's like to have skills you can't use, knowledge that goes to waste." He paused, then added quietly, "And because I recognize someone running from injustice, not crime. There's a difference in how they carry themselves." Margaret's composure, held so carefully through the crisis, finally cracked. A single tear traced down her cheek before she could stop it. "You don't know what you're risking, sheltering me." "I know exactly what I'm risking," Elias replied. "The question is whether Sage Creek needs a healer more than it needs to follow every letter of distant law. I've made my choice." The coyote called again, closer now. Somewhere. Tom Hartley slept peacefully in his steam tent, breathing easily. The saloon had gone silent. Even the wind had stilled. "Your wife," Margaret said suddenly. "What was her name?" "Sarah. Sarah Marie Holt. She was 28. The fever was there, a rash delirium. Both. Started with headache, then the fever spiked. Scarlet fever, possibly, or typhoid." Margaret's voice turned clinical, distant. "With proper treatment, willow bark for fever. Constant hydration. Cold compresses rotated properly. The survival rate improves significantly." "You speak like a doctor," Elias said carefully. "I speak like someone who's observed many deaths." Margaret corrected, but her tone suggested far more. Someone who's seen what proper treatment could accomplish, if it were allowed. They sat in silence as the lamp burned low. Finally, Margaret rose, Adelaide's shawl sliding from her shoulders. "Thank you, Sheriff, for the coffee, for—" she gestured vaguely toward the Hartley house. "For understanding, Elias," he said. "If we're going to be conspirators in helping this town, you should call me Elias." She paused at the door, almost smiled. "Good night, Elias." After she disappeared inside, Elias remained on the porch, considering the stars and the strange turns life took. Somewhere in the darkness, a child breathed easily because a woman with hidden knowledge had dared to share it, even from the shadows. Change was coming to Sage Creek. He could feel it in the night air, see it in the way Margaret had fought her instincts to help, then helped anyway. The town needed healing. Perhaps they'd finally found their healer. He just had to keep her safe long enough for the truth to set them all free. The morning sun had barely crested the mountains when Jake Miller's youngest son came tearing into town on a lathered horse, his 12-year-old face white with panic. Elias was just stepping out of the jailhouse when the boy nearly fell from his mount. "Sheriff Pa needs you quick. It's Sam the Thresher, his leg." The boy gulped air, unable to form complete sentences. "Slow down, Timothy." Elias gripped the boy's shoulders. "What happened to Sam?" "The threshing machine. Something broke, caught his leg." Timothy's voice cracked. "There's so much blood. Ma sent me. Says we need the doctor, but there ain't one." Elias was already moving toward the stable. "How long ago?" "Maybe 20 minutes. Pa and the others got him free. But his leg—" The boy turned greener. "It's bent wrong, Sheriff. Real wrong." Elias had seen machinery accidents before. Without immediate treatment, Sam Henderson would likely lose the leg, if not his life. He was calculating the ride time, knowing it might already be too late. When Margaret appeared in the stable doorway, "I heard the boy," she said simply. She'd changed into a practical dark dress, her medical bag in hand. "You'll need help." "Margaret, no. If you expose yourself, that man will die." Her voice cut through his protest with clinical precision. "A crushed leg means probable arterial damage. Without immediate intervention, he'll bleed to death or lose the limb to gangrene. I can help?" The whole Miller family will see you. They're ranch hands. Word will spread. Then it spreads. She moved past him to his horse. Sheriff Elias, I need to tell you something. I'm not just someone who's observed medicine. I'm a licensed physician. Anyway. It's complicated, and there's no time to explain fully. But I graduated from the Women's Medical College of Chicago, third in my class. I've performed dozens of surgeries. I can save this man's leg, possibly his life. But only if we leave now. Elias stared at her for a heartbeat, this small woman with her refined hands and hidden strength. Then he made his decision. Can you ride? Adequately. He saddled his mare quickly while Margaret secured her bag. When he offered to help her mount, she surprised him by swinging up smoothly, adjusting her skirts for the side saddle with practiced ease. Timothy, ride ahead. Tell them help's coming, Elias commanded. The boy shot off like cannon fire. They rode hard through the morning heat, 5 miles of dusty trail that Margaret navigated with unexpected skill. Her medical bag bounced against the saddle, but she'd secured it well. As they rode, she shouted instructions over the thunder of hooves. I'll need carbolic acid, do they have any? Miller's Progressive, he might. Clean linens, boiled if possible. All the clean water they can heat. And laudanum if they have it. Margaret, are you certain about this, once you step into that role? I became certain the moment I took my oath to do no harm, she replied. That includes the harm of inaction. The Miller Ranch sprawled across a valley, their fields golden with ready grain. But the threshing had stopped. A cluster of figures gathered near the silent machine. Even from a distance, they could hear a man's agonized groans. Sam Henderson lay on a blanket in the shade, his right leg grotesquely twisted below the knee. The break was compound white bone visible through torn flesh and trouser. His face was gray, eyes rolling with shock. Ellen Miller pressed cloths against the wound while her husband, Jacob, held Sam's shoulders. Thank God, Jacob said. Then his expression shifted to confusion as Margaret dismounted. Sheriff? Who? Someone who can help, Elias said firmly. Everyone step back. Margaret was already kneeling beside Sam, her entire demeanor transformed. Gone was the cautious woman from the boarding house. In her place knelt a physician, hands moving with swift assessment over the injury. Compound fracture of the tibia and fibula, she announced. Significant tissue damage, but the artery's intact, he's lucky. She looked up sharply. I need carbolic acid solution, clean linens, something for Splint's straight boards, thick enough to hold weight, and laudanum. Now. The authority in her voice broke through their shock. Ellen Miller ran for the house while ranch hands scattered for supplies. Margaret opened her bag, revealing gleaming surgical instruments that caught the morning sun. Sheriff, I need you to hold him, Margaret instructed. This is going to hurt. She gave Sam a dose of laudanum from her supplies, waiting precious minutes for it to take effect. Meanwhile, she directed the creation of her makeshift surgery sheets boiled and laid out, instruments soaking in carbolic solution, barn boards cut for splints. Who are you? Jacob Miller asked, awe creeping into his voice. Someone who knows what she's doing. Margaret replied curtly, Now, unless you want to help, please give me room to work. When she began the reduction realigning the broken bones, Sam's screams echoed across the valley despite the laudanum. Elias and 2 ranch hands held him steady while Margaret worked with unwavering focus. Her small hands proved deceptively strong, manipulating the fracture with precise force. There, she breathed as the bones aligned. Now for the bleeding. She sutured the largest wounds with boiled horsehair, her needle flashing in quick, neat movements. The ranch hands watched in stunned silence as she worked, this small woman commanding the space like a general on a battlefield. I've seen army surgeons work slower, one former soldier muttered. Margaret cleaned and dressed the wound with carbolic-soaked linens, then supervised the splinting, ensuring perfect immobilization. Through it all, she maintained a stream of clinical observations, partly for her own focus, partly to reassure the watchers that she knew exactly what she was doing. The break is clean despite appearances. With proper care, he should keep the leg. No wait for 8 weeks minimum. The wound needs cleaning daily with carbolic solution. I'll show you how. Mrs. Miller, watch for red streaks or fever. If either appears, send for me immediately. You're a doctor, Ellen Miller said. Not a question, but recognition. A real doctor. Margaret's hands stilled for a moment. I trained as one, yes. Then why? Because sometimes the world doesn't allow people to be what they're meant to be. Elias interjected. What matters is she was here when needed. Sam had passed into laudanum-induced sleep, his breathing steady, the ghostly pallor receding from his face. Margaret repacked her instruments methodically, each one cleaned and dried before storage. Jacob Miller reached for his wallet. What do we owe you, miss? Nothing. Margaret stood, brushing dust from her skirts. No names, no payment, just healing. That's my only requirement. But you saved his leg, probably his life. And that's payment enough. She looked around the assembled group family and ranch hands, probably 15 witnesses total. I need your discretion, all of you. Can you give me that? Ellen Miller stepped forward, taking Margaret's blood-stained hands in her own. You saved Sam. Whatever you need from us, you have it. The others nodded agreement, even the skeptical ranch hands. They'd witnessed something remarkable, not just medical skill, but courage, compassion, the kind of healing the frontier desperately needed. As they prepared to leave, Timothy Miller approached shyly. Ma'am, I ain't never seen anything like it. The way you just knew what to do. Margaret's stern expression softened. Knowledge is just a tool. Timothy, it's the choice to use it that matters. The ride back was slower, both horses tired, and the emergency passed. Margaret sat slightly slumped in the saddle, exhaustion replacing adrenaline. Her dress was ruined with blood and dust. Her carefully pinned hair had come loose, and her hands trembled slightly on the reins. You realize what you've done, Elias said quietly. There's no hiding now. I know. She straightened slightly. I suppose I knew from the moment I heard that boy's panic. Some things matter more than safety. The Millers will talk, despite their promises. Let them. A hint of her former fire returned. I'm tired of hiding, Elias. Tired of watching people suffer when I could help. If Sage Creek runs me out, at least I'll have tried. He studied her profile, the determined set of her jaw, the way she held her head despite exhaustion. Sage Creek might surprise you. We judge by actions here, not rumors. And when my past arrives, because it will, it always does. Then we'll face it together, Elias said, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. You're not alone anymore, Margaret. She looked at him then, something shifting in her guarded eyes. Why are you helping me? Really? Because 8 years ago, my wife died while I watched helplessly. Today, Sam Henderson lived because you had the courage to act. That's all the reason I need. They rode the rest of the way in companionable silence, the morning sun climbing toward noon. Behind them, Sam Henderson slept peacefully, his leg saved by a woman who'd chosen healing over hiding. Ahead, Sage Creek waited, about to discover they had a doctor again. Even if she came wrapped in mystery and shadows, the secret was out. Now they'd see if a frontier town could offer what civilization had denied a second chance for a healer who'd lost everything except her calling. 3 weeks had passed since the incident at Miller's ranch. Word had spread despite promises of discretion, not as gossip, but as whispered hope. Margaret had treated 2 more injuries in secret, a birth that would have gone wrong, and chronic pain in the minister's wife that previous doctors had dismissed as hysteria. She worked in shadows, accepting no payment, leaving no trace except healing. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by Adelaide with the rest of the boarding house mail. Margaret recognized the handwriting before she saw the Chicago postmark her former landlady, Mrs. Grayson, one of the few who'd believed in her innocence. The envelope was worn, forwarded from 3 different towns. each address crossed out and replaced. Someone had been tracking her westward movement. Margaret's knees buckled. She caught herself on the porch railing, the letter crumpling in her white-knuckled grip. "Margaret!" Adelaide's voice seemed to come from far away. "Child, what is it?" Margaret couldn't form words. The morning sun felt cold. "Excuse me." She fled to her room, Adelaide's concerned calls following her up the stairs. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and read, "My dear Margaret, I pray this reaches you. Men came again last week, Pinkerton detectives this time, hired by the Aldridge family. They have sworn statements from Doctors Hoffman and Cromwell supporting their claims. There's now a warrant. They say you administered improper treatment causing Mr. Aldridge's death. We both know the truth that you diagnosed correctly while those fools insisted on bloodletting for what was clearly heart failure. But truth matters little when powerful men unite against an inconvenient woman. They know you went west. They're checking every town along the railroad. Burn this letter. Trust no one. Your friend always, Martha Grayson." The paper slipped from Margaret's numb fingers. A warrant. Not just professional ruin, but criminal charges. The Aldridge family, wealthy, connected, vindictive in their grief, had found willing accomplices and colleagues who'd resented her presence from the beginning. She sat on her narrow bed until sunset, paralyzed by the weight of inevitability. When darkness fell, she knew what she had to do. Elias's office occupied the back of the jailhouse. A simple room with a scarred desk, 2 chairs, and a gun rack. She found him there by lamplight, studying what looked like telegraph messages. He glanced up as she entered, and his expression immediately sharpened. "What's happened?" Margaret sat without invitation, placing the letter on his desk with steady hands that belied her internal trembling. "Read it." She watched his face as he read, the tightening jaw. The flash of anger quickly controlled. When he finished, he set the letter down carefully, as if it might explode. "Tell me everything," he said quietly. "From the beginning." Margaret had rehearsed this story in her mind countless times, but speaking it aloud felt like bleeding. Jonathan Aldridge, 62 years old, wealthy grain merchant. He came to the clinic where I worked, the only woman physician among 7 men. Chest pains, difficulty breathing, swelling in his extremities, classic signs of heart failure. She paused, gathering strength. Elias waited, patient as stone. Doctors Hoffman and Cromwell diagnosed bad blood, prescribed bloodletting and mercury treatments. I objected, privately at first, then more forcefully when Mr. Aldridge worsened. I recommended Digitalis for his heart, rest, careful diet. They laughed at me, called me hysterical. But you were right. Being right doesn't matter when the patient dies anyway. Bitterness crept into her voice. His family demanded I treat him. His wife had heard about my success with similar cases. Hoffman and Cromwell withdrew in protest. I administered proper treatment, but it was too late. The damage from weeks of bloodletting and mercury poisoning. She shrugged helplessly. He died 3 days later. They blamed you. Exclusively. Hoffman testified that I'd given him experimental treatments. Cromwell swore I'd ignored established medical practice. Other colleagues, men who'd resented me since my first day, supported their claims. The medical board revoked my license without letting me present evidence. The Aldridge family wanted criminal charges, but I fled before... Her voice broke slightly. I fled like a coward. Like a survivor, Elias corrected firmly. No jury would have listened to a woman against established male physicians. Margaret laughed bitterly. You understand, then, why I couldn't simply start over, why I've been hiding. Actually, Elias interrupted, opening his desk drawer. I've known most of this for 2 weeks. Margaret went rigid. What? He pulled out a folder containing telegraph messages, newspaper clippings, and at the bottom, a wanted poster with her sketch, a poor likeness but recognizable enough. After the Miller Ranch, I sent inquiries to a friend in Chicago, a judge who owes me favors from the war. He investigated quietly. Margaret stared at the documents spread between them. You've known this whole time. I know Hoffman and Cromwell have been censured twice since for patient deaths. I know 3 other physicians wrote letters defending you that the board ignored. I know Mrs. Aldridge herself questioned the verdict before her family silenced her. He pulled out one more paper, a letter on official letterhead. And I know Judge Harrison believes you were railroaded by jealous colleagues and a grieving family seeking someone to blame. Why didn't you, Margaret's voice failed her, tell you weren't ready to trust me? Maybe you're still not. But that letter changes things. Elias picked up the wanted poster, studying it in the lamplight. The woman described here, Margaret Louise Winters, dangerous medical practitioner, doesn't exist in Sage Creek. He held the poster over the lamp's chimney. The paper caught instantly, curling into ash that he let fall into a metal waste bin. What does exist, he continued calmly, is Dr. Margaret Winters, who's saved 3 lives in as many weeks, who treats patients regardless of payment, who works despite exhaustion and asks nothing but discretion in return. Elias, you can't just... I'm the law in Sage Creek, he said simply. I enforce it as I see fit. And I see a talented physician being persecuted for the crime of being right while female. Margaret pressed her hands flat on the desk to stop their trembling. If they send Pinkertons, then they'll find a town that protects its own. You're ours now. Margaret, the Millers made that clear. So did the Hartleys, the minister's wife, and the Martinez family whose baby you delivered last week. You know about that too. I'm sheriff. I know everything that matters. He leaned forward, his gray eyes intent. But more importantly, I know you. I've watched you fight every instinct to help, then help anyway. I've seen you work miracles with nothing but skill and compassion. Sage Creek needs you. And when the warrant arrives, when official law enforcement, territory law is complex, Elias interrupted. Extradition requires extensive proof, local cooperation. Amazing how paperwork can get lost. Witnesses can develop poor memories. He paused. I'm not saying it'll be easy, but you're not facing it alone. Margaret studied his weathered face, searching for doubt or deception. She found neither. Why, she whispered, why risk your position, your reputation? Because justice and law aren't the same thing. You taught me that. He stood, moving around the desk to crouch beside her chair, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. Because 8 years ago, I watched my wife die while a doctor was too far away to help. Because you've brought healing back to this town. Because... He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. Because... Margaret prompted, her heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. Because somewhere between that first night on the porch and watching you save Sam Henderson, I started caring about what happens to you. Not as sheriff, not as protector, but as a man who... He squeezed her hands gently. As a man who doesn't want to see you run anymore. Margaret turned her hands in his, interlacing their fingers. I'm tired of running. Then don't. Stay. Fight. Let the town fight with you. And if we lose, then we face that together too. His thumb traced across her knuckles, a gesture achingly tender. I meant what I said. Sage Creek judges by actions, not accusations. Your actions have been nothing but honorable. A tear escaped down Margaret's cheek. I've been so alone with this. Not anymore. Elias stood, pulling her gently to her feet. Never again. If you'll let me stand with you. They stood close in the lamplight, the burned poster's ashes settling in the bin, the weight of truth spoken finally lifting from Margaret's shoulders. Outside. Sage Creek settled into evening routines, families gathering for dinner, shopkeepers closing their doors, ordinary life continuing while in the sheriff's office. 2 people chose to face an uncertain future together rather than a certain one apart. There's something else, Elias said quietly, not releasing her hands. My friend, Judge Harrison. He's working on something. There might be a way to restore your license, or at least clear your name legally. It'll take time, but you'd do that for me. I'd do more than that, he admitted. Margaret, She stopped him with a gentle squeeze of his hands. I know. I feel the same. But not yet. Not while this shadow hangs over us. When I'm free, truly free, then we can speak of other things. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then we'd better work on getting you free. Margaret managed a small smile, her first genuine one since receiving the letter. Together. They released hands reluctantly, propriety reasserting itself. But something fundamental had shifted between them from protector and protected to partners, united against whatever storms might come. As Margaret walked back to the boarding house, the stars bright above Sage Creek, she felt something she hadn't experienced since fleeing Chicago: hope, not just for survival, but for a future, a real life. Maybe even love. Behind her, Elias stood in his office doorway, watching her go. He'd made his choice. Now he had to ensure the town would support it, because Margaret Winters, his Margaret, he admitted silently deserved more than sanctuary. She deserved justice. And by God, he'd see she got it. The fever announced itself on a Thursday morning with 3 children absent from the schoolhouse. By noon, that number had doubled. By evening, when Elias made his rounds, he found houses with yellow quarantine flags already appearing, the frontier's universal signal of contagion. Margaret was helping Adelaide prepare dinner when young Peter Hoffman burst through the boarding house door, his 10-year-old face flushed with more than exertion. Mrs. Brennan, Ma says come quick. Lucy's burning up and seeing things that ain't there. Adelaide's hands stilled on the bread she was slicing. Margaret stepped forward from the stove, her medical instincts already cataloging symptoms. How long has she been ill, Peter? Margaret asked quietly. Since last night. Started with a sore throat. Ma said. Now she's got these red marks all over and... The boy's voice cracked. She keeps calling for our grandmother, but Grandma's been dead 2 years. Margaret and Adelaide exchanged glances. Scarlet fever, the distinctive rash, high fever, delirium. It could sweep through a town like wildfire, especially among children. I'll come, Adelaide said, reaching for her shawl. Wait. Margaret moved to the window, observing the street. 3 more houses showed lamplight despite the early hour families keeping vigil. Peter, how many other children are sick? Tommy Martinez, both the Sawyer girls, the youngest Brown boy. Peter counted on his fingers. Maybe 7 or 8 total. Margaret's mind raced through calculations. An outbreak this size would overwhelm Adelaide and the few women who knew basic nursing. Without proper treatment and quarantine, half the town's children could be infected within a week. Adelaide, we need to organize. Margaret turned from the window. Decision made. Send Peter to gather the women who've nursed through fever before Mrs. Miller, Mrs. Hartley, the minister's wife. Have them meet at the old doctor's office in an hour. Margaret, that's exposing yourself completely. Children are dying. Margaret's voice cut through Adelaide's protest. I took an oath. Within the hour, Dr. Morrison's abandoned office had transformed into a command center. Margaret stood before 8 women, their faces showing various degrees of fear, confusion, and desperate hope. On the table before her lay supplies she'd instructed them to gather: willow bark, honey, vinegar, lime wash, and every clean cloth they could spare. The fever's pattern indicates scarlet fever, Margaret announced without preamble. It's highly contagious but treatable if we act quickly and maintain strict protocols. Who exactly are you to diagnose this? Mrs. Hoffman demanded. Her daughter's illness making her sharp. We've been tolerating mysterious medical advice for weeks, but now... I'm someone who's treated dozens of scarlet fever cases. Margaret interrupted calmly. Successfully? Now, we can waste time with questions. Or we can save your children. Choose. Ellen Miller stepped forward. She saved Sam's leg. That's enough for me. What do we do? Margaret began issuing instructions with the crisp efficiency of a battlefield commander. First, quarantine. Sick children must be isolated from healthy siblings. Yellow flags on every affected house. No one enters or leaves without following decontamination procedures. She demonstrated mixing lime wash for disinfecting, the proper ratio of honey and vinegar for throat treatments, how to prepare willow bark tea for fever reduction. The women absorbed every detail with the focused intensity of mothers whose children's lives hung in the balance. Flannel masks, Margaret continued, showing them how to tie cloth over nose and mouth. Everyone wears them when entering sick rooms. Wash your hands in carbolic solution between patients. These practices seem excessive, but they prevent spread. Where did you learn all this? The minister's wife asked, awe creeping into her voice. Does it matter? Margaret responded. Will knowing my history save your children faster? They worked through the night, converting the dusty office into a treatment center. Margaret supervised the cleaning with lime wash, the organization of supplies, the establishment of separate areas for different stages of illness. By dawn, they had 6 children in the makeshift ward, with more arriving hourly. Margaret moved between patients with tireless efficiency, adjusting treatments, instructing mothers, documenting symptoms. She'd shed all pretense of being merely observant. She was fully, unmistakably a physician in command of her domain. On the second day, the town council arrived. Marcus Hayes, the banker, led them 5 men who controlled Sage Creek's official business. Their faces showed the unique combination of desperation and indignation that came from powerful men facing something beyond their control. Who authorized this? Hayes demanded, gesturing at the transformed office. Who's treating our children? Margaret emerged from behind a quarantine curtain, pulling off her flannel mask. Her dress was stained with medicine and sweat. Her hair escaped from its pins, dark circles shadowing her eyes, but she stood straight, meeting their gaze without flinching. I did. I am. And who exactly are you? Hayes stepped forward aggressively. Some traveling woman appears from nowhere, claims medical knowledge. My name is Dr. Margaret Winters, she said clearly. I graduated from the Women's Medical College of Chicago, 3rd in my class. I've been treating your citizens for a month, asking nothing in return. Now your children are dying, and you want to question my credentials. You're a woman, one of the councilmen started. An excellent observation, Margaret said dryly. Also irrelevant. The fever doesn't care about my gender, only my competence. This is highly irregular, Hayes began. A commotion at the door interrupted him. Timothy Miller burst in, panic-stricken. Mr. Hayes, your son William's taken ill. Mrs. Hayes says, come quick. The banker's face went white. William, but he was fine this morning. Fever spikes quickly in children, Margaret said calmly. Bring him here immediately. We have the best chance of treating him with our established protocols. Hayes stood frozen, torn between suspicion and paternal terror. Elias stepped forward from where he'd been observing. Marcus, I've watched Dr. Winters work. She's saved 3 lives that I know of. Probably more. Someone with more courage than all of us is offering to save your son. I suggest you accept. You knew. Hayes turned on Elias. You knew she was practicing medicine without... I knew she was healing people. Elias interrupted firmly. That seemed more important than paperwork. Margaret stepped between them. Gentlemen, argue later. Mr. Hayes, your son needs treatment now. You can run me out of town after the fever breaks, but let me save your children first. When the standoff lasted 10 heartbeats, then Hayes's shoulders sagged. Save him, please. William Hayes arrived within the hour, his fever already dangerously high. Margaret worked over him personally while instructing his mother in support care. She mixed the willow bark tea precisely, applied cold compresses in careful rotation, administered the honey-vinegar mixture drop by careful drop. For 3 days, she barely left his side. The banker haunted the doorway, Watching this woman he'd been ready to condemn fight for his son's life with unwavering dedication. On the fourth morning, William's fever broke. He opened clear eyes and asked for water in a weak but coherent voice. Marcus Hayes, the stern banker who hadn't cried since childhood, wept openly. Margaret continued her rounds without acknowledgement of the victory. There were still 15 children in various stages of illness. She moved between them like a force of nature, adjusting treatments, comforting mothers, training volunteers in proper care. The women of Sage Creek became her army. They followed her protocols religiously, seeing the results in recovering children. The quarantine held, new cases dwindled. By the end of the second week, the fever's back was broken. Margaret had worked 18-hour days throughout the crisis. She'd collapsed twice from exhaustion, only to rise and continue within hours. Her hands were raw from carbolic wash, her voice hoarse from constant instruction. But she never stopped until the last child was declared recovering. On the final evening, as she prepared to leave the makeshift hospital, she found the town council waiting. Marcus Hayes stepped forward, his son's recovery having transformed him from adversary to advocate. "Dr. Winters," he said formally, "on behalf of Sage Creek, we owe you an apology and our deepest gratitude." Margaret swayed slightly on her feet, exhaustion finally claiming its due. "I need no apologies. Just let me practice medicine without interference." "You'll have more than that," Hayes promised. The council voted unanimously. "The doctor's office is yours if you want it. We'll provide supplies, whatever you need." "And my past?" "The questions about my credentials." Hayes met her gaze steadily. "What past Sage Creek knows only Dr. Winters, who saved our children when no one else could." Margaret looked at the assembled council, then at the women who'd become her assistants, finally at Elias standing quietly in the corner, pride evident in his weathered face. "Then I accept," she said simply, before her knees buckled. Elias caught her before she hit the floor, lifting her easily in his arms. "Someone else's turn to be cared for," he said gruffly. As he carried her to the boarding house, the town council and women followed like an honor guard. Windows opened as they passed, families calling out thanks. Children, weak but recovering, waved from their beds. Sage Creek had found its doctor. More than that, it had found its heart, a woman who'd risked everything to heal strangers who'd become family. The fever was broken, but something else had been born in its place, a community united by crisis, bonded by gratitude, and fiercely protective of the woman who'd saved their future. In her exhausted sleep, Margaret didn't hear the church bells ring, not in mourning, but in celebration. The sound carried across the valley, announcing to neighboring settlements that Sage Creek had survived its trial, and that Dr. Margaret Winters was home. The collapse came 3 days after the fever broke, as Margaret finished examining the last recovering child. She'd been upright for 72 hours straight, sustained by nothing but willpower and black coffee. Her body simply stopped obeying her commands. One moment she was replacing instruments in her medical bag. The next, the floor was rushing up to meet her. Elias caught her before she hit the ground, his arms encircling her waist as her legs gave way completely. "Margaret!" Adelaide rushed forward from where she'd been folding linens. "Dear Lord, she's burning up." Elias lifted Margaret easily, alarmed at how light she felt, how her head lolled against his shoulder. Her skin felt like fire through the thin fabric of her dress. "She's pushed too hard. We need to get her to bed." "My room at the boarding house," Adelaide said, already gathering Margaret's medical bag. "It's larger, better ventilation." Elias carried Margaret through streets that had grown quiet with evening. Word spread quickly Dr. Winters had collapsed. Curtains parted as they passed, worried faces peering out. The woman who'd saved their children now needed saving herself. Adelaide's room was indeed spacious, with windows on 2 walls that caught the evening breeze. The feather mattress accepted Margaret's slight form gently as Elias laid her down. Her face was flushed with fever, hair damp with perspiration, breathing shallow and rapid. "We need to cool her down," Adelaide said, already pouring water into the china basin. "The fever's too high." Elias pulled a chair beside the bed, taking the cloth Adelaide offered. As he pressed it to Margaret's burning forehead, her eyes fluttered open, but they weren't seeing the present. "I tried to save him," she whispered, her voice raw. "Mr. Aldridge, the treatment was correct. I know it was correct. But they wouldn't listen. They never listened to a woman." "Shh," Elias murmured, refreshing the cloth. "You're safe. Rest now." But Margaret was lost in delirium, reliving moments that had haunted her for months. "They laughed when I suggested digitalis. Hoffman said women were too emotional for medicine, that we couldn't make rational decisions when lives hung in the balance." Adelaide prepared beef broth in the kitchen while Elias maintained his vigil. He'd removed his vest and rolled up his shirt sleeves, settling in for a long night. His pocket watch ticked on the bedside table, 8 o'clock. 9, 10. Every 15 minutes, he refreshed the cool cloths, rotating them across her forehead, neck, and wrists. "Sarah," Margaret called out suddenly, making Elias start. "Sarah needs willow bark." "The fever's too high. Why won't they let me treat her?" Elias's throat tightened. She was conflating her memories with his story about his wife. Even in delirium, she was trying to save everyone. "They're all safe," he told her softly. "You saved them all." Margaret's hand found his, gripping with surprising strength. "The sheriff," she murmured. And for a moment he thought she recognized him, but her eyes remained unfocused. "The sheriff with gentle eyes. He doesn't look at me like I'm strange or unwelcome. He looks at me like I matter." Elias squeezed her hand carefully. "You do matter, more than you know." Adelaide returned with broth and camphor oil. She raised an eyebrow at their clasped hands, but said nothing, busying herself with adding the camphor to the wash basin for its cooling properties. "How long have you been in love with her?" Adelaide asked quietly, when Margaret had drifted into deeper sleep. "I don't know what you mean. Elias Holt. I've known you 15 years. You haven't looked at a woman like this since Sarah died. Probably not even then, if I'm honest." Elias was quiet for a long moment, watching Margaret's fevered face in the lamplight. "Since the night she saved the Hartley boy without taking credit. Maybe before. She's—" he struggled for words. "She's extraordinary. Adelaide. And you're just now realizing she feels the same." Adelaide shook her head. "Men. She mentions you constantly when she thinks no one's listening. The sheriff said this. Elias thinks that. Girl's been falling for weeks." As if responding to her name, Margaret stirred restlessly. "Can't let them find me," she muttered. "Can't bring trouble to him. He's too good, too honorable, deserves better than a runaway doctor with a ruined name." "You deserve everything," Elias said firmly, not caring that she couldn't truly hear him. "You deserve respect and recognition and—" He stopped, aware of Adelaide's knowing smile. The night wore on. Midnight came and went. Elias spooned broth between Margaret's lips when she'd take it, continued the cooling treatments, whispered reassurances when she cried out in her sleep. His pocket watch marked the hours 1 o'clock, 2, 3, around 4 in the morning. Margaret's fever spiked dangerously. She thrashed against the bedding, lost in some nightmare where she was being dragged before a medical board, men in black coats condemning her while patients died behind glass walls she couldn't break. "No," she cried out. "I can help them. Please, let me help them." Elias abandoned the chair, sitting on the bed's edge to hold her shoulders gently. "Margaret, you're safe. You're in Sage Creek. You're home." Her eyes opened, meeting his with sudden clarity. "Elias, I'm here. Don't let them take me." Her hand found his face, fingers tracing his jaw with fevered intensity. "I've finally found where I belong. Found you. Don't let them—" "Never." He caught her hand, pressing it to his lips. "You're under my protection. More than that, you're in my heart. Margaret, You have been for weeks. She smiled then, a soft, wondering expression. Your heart. Completely? Adelaide cleared her throat. The fever's breaking. See? She's starting to sweat properly now. Indeed, Margaret's skin had gone from burning dry to damp with healthy perspiration. Her breathing deepened, becoming more regular. The crisis had passed. Sleep now, Elias told her. I'll be here when you wake. Promise, she whispered, already drifting. Promise. As dawn light crept through the windows, Margaret slept peacefully. Elias remained in his chair, their hands still clasped. He'd removed his wedding ring sometime during the night. Adelaide noticed it sitting beside his pocket watch, catching the morning sun. 8 years of wearing it, and now it sat abandoned, a symbol of a past finally released. Adelaide brought fresh coffee as the town began to wake. You should rest yourself, she told Elias. You've been up all night. I'm fine where I am. About time, Adelaide muttered, but she was smiling. Both of you dancing around each other for weeks. Takes a crisis to make fools see sense. Around 8 o'clock, Margaret's eyes opened clearly. She found Elias immediately, his face drawn with exhaustion but smiling. You stayed, she said softly. I promised. She noticed their joined hands, neither making any move to separate them. I remember some of what I said. In the fever. Which parts? The parts about gentle eyes, about finding home, about, she swallowed, about being in your heart. All true, Elias said simply. Every word I said in return. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I wanted to wait until my past was resolved, until I could come to you free of shadows. I don't care about shadows, Elias told her. I care about you, the woman who saves lives and asks nothing in return, who faces down councils and fever with equal courage, who's brought healing to this town and to me. Elias, I love you, Margaret. The words came out firm and clear. I've loved you since you stood in my office and told me you were tired of running. Maybe since that first night at the depot. I love your strength and your compassion and your stubborn refusal to let people suffer when you can help. Margaret freed her hand only to reach for his face, drawing him down until their foreheads touched. I love you too, my sheriff with gentle eyes who sees me for who I truly am. Adelaide bustled in with fresh linens, taking in the intimate scene with satisfaction. Well, finally, half the town's been placing bets on when you two would admit it. Mrs. Miller wins, I believe. They pulled apart, laughing, but their hands found each other again immediately. You need more rest, Elias told Margaret. Real rest. The town's safe, the children are recovering. Let someone else be the doctor for a few days. Only if you rest too, Margaret negotiated. You look worse than some of my patients. Adelaide, could you... Already making up the spare room for the sheriff, Adelaide interrupted. Though Lord knows the whole town will be talking by noon. Let them talk, Elias said, squeezing Margaret's hand. We've nothing to hide anymore. As Margaret drifted back to healing sleep, Elias finally accepted Adelaide's offer of the spare room, but not before pressing one more kiss to Margaret's hand, a promise of all the conversations and moments to come. The dark night had passed. In its wake came not just recovery but revelation. Two souls who'd found each other across loss and fear, building love on the foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose. Outside, Sage Creek stirred to life in the morning sun. The fever had broken. Hearts had been declared. And in Adelaide's boarding house, two people who'd saved each other in different ways slept peacefully, hands still reaching across the space between them, never quite letting go. The morning train from Denver arrived with its usual whistle and steam. but it carried an unusual passenger. Detective Thomas Pinkerton stepped onto the platform with the measured confidence of a man who'd tracked dozens of fugitives across the frontier. His black suit was pristine despite the journey, his bowler hat positioned at a precise angle, and the badge inside his coat pocket carried the weight of Eastern authority. He'd been in Sage Creek less than an hour when Elias found him at Hartley's Mercantile, showing a sketch to James Hartley while asking pointed questions about recent arrivals. "Morning," Elias said calmly, though his hand rested casually near his Colt. "Sheriff Holt. Heard we had a visitor." Pinkerton turned, assessing Elias with professional interest. "Detective Thomas Pinkerton, Chicago Branch. I'm looking for a woman, a dangerous medical practitioner who fled Illinois under suspicious circumstances." "Dangerous." Elias kept his voice neutral. "That's a serious claim. You have papers." Pinkerton produced a leather folder containing an arrest warrant, the sketch of Margaret, and several official-looking documents. Margaret Louise Winters, wanted for criminal malpractice resulting in death. "The Aldridge family hired us after local law enforcement failed to apprehend her." James Hartley had gone pale, remembering the night Margaret saved his son. He caught Elias's eye, a silent question passing between them. "These are Illinois papers," Elias observed, studying the documents carefully. "This is Colorado territory, different jurisdiction. The warrant's been validated for interstate pursuit," Pinkerton replied smoothly. "I have full authority to detain and transport the suspect back to Chicago for trial." "You have authority to request local cooperation," Elias corrected, "which means you work through me. And in Sage Creek, we do things properly. If you believe someone in my town matches this description, we'll hold a hearing. Judge Carlton's not due for 3 weeks, so I'll convene a citizens' tribunal." Pinkerton's eyes narrowed. "That's highly irregular. That's frontier justice, detective, fair and open. If you have evidence, present it to the town. If they agree your suspect is here, I'll honor the warrant. If not, you'll take the evening train back to Denver." Word spread through Sage Creek like wildfire. Within an hour, everyone knew about the detective from Chicago, the warrant, and the sheriff's demanded tribunal. Margaret heard the news from Adelaide, who'd run back from the Mercantile with her face flushed from more than exertion. "There's a Pinkerton man asking about you," Adelaide said breathlessly. "Elias is handling it." "But—" Margaret stood from where she'd been organizing medicines in her new office. 3 weeks had passed since her collapse, since she and Elias had declared their love. 3 weeks of working openly as the town's doctor, of evening walks with Elias, of feeling like she'd finally found home. "I knew this day would come," she said quietly. "You don't have to face him." Elias said, "No." Margaret's voice carried steel. "I'm done hiding, done running. If they want to accuse me, they'll do it to my face." The Liberty Saloon had been chosen for its size, the only building that could hold most of the town. By 2 o'clock, it had transformed into an impromptu courtroom. Tables pushed aside, chairs arranged in rows, the bar serving as a judge's bench where Elias presided. The spittoons had been removed in deference to the ladies present, and afternoon sunlight streamed through windows usually shuttered against it. Detective Pinkerton stood at what would be the prosecutor's position, his documents arranged precisely. The town filled every available space, ranchers who'd ridden in after hearing the news. Mothers holding children Margaret had saved. Marcus Hayes and the town council in the front row. When Margaret entered, a murmur ran through the crowd. She wore her best dress, simple black wool with white collar and cuffs, professional and dignified. Her medical bag was in her hand, her head held high. She walked directly to face Pinkerton, ignoring the chair Elias had placed for the accused. "I'm Margaret Winters," she announced clearly. "I understand you've been looking for me." Pinkerton seemed momentarily taken aback by her direct approach. "You're admitting your identity." "I'm admitting I'm Dr. Margaret Winters, physician to Sage Creek." What else I am or am not remains to be proven. Elias called for order, though the room had gone silent. Detective Pinkerton, present your evidence. The detective laid out his case methodically. The death of Jonathan Aldridge, the testimony of Doctors Hoffman and Cromwell, the revoked medical license, the flight from Chicago. He painted a picture of a reckless woman who'd ignored established medical practice, caused a patient's death through incompetence, then fled justice. The warrant is clear, Pinkerton concluded. This woman is wanted for criminal malpractice. She should be returned to Chicago immediately to face trial. Is that all? Elias asked. That's sufficient for extradition. Perhaps, but in Sage Creek, we like to hear both sides. Elias turned to Margaret. Dr. Winters, would you care to respond? Margaret stood facing the assembled town, these people who'd become her patients, her neighbors, her family. Everything Detective Pinkerton said is true, from a certain perspective, she began, causing Pinkerton to look triumphant. Mr. Aldridge did die under my care. My medical license was revoked. I did flee Chicago. She paused, meeting eyes throughout the room. But truth requires context. Mr. Aldridge was dying when I took his case after weeks of bloodletting and mercury treatments that destroyed his remaining strength. I diagnosed heart failure and prescribed appropriate treatment, but the damage was irreversible. He would have died regardless, but he died without pain, with dignity, under proper medical care. You violated established medical practice, Pinkerton interrupted. I violated the egos of male physicians who couldn't accept that a woman diagnosed correctly where they failed, Margaret shot back. Doctors Hoffman and Cromwell have since been censured for similar failures. 3 other physicians wrote letters defending my treatment. Mrs. Aldridge herself questioned the verdict before her family silenced her. Hearsay. Facts. Elias interrupted, producing a telegram. From Judge Harrison in Chicago, confirming everything Dr. Winters just said. He's been investigating the case independently. Pinkerton's composed facade cracked slightly. Regardless, there's a legal warrant. For someone who matches this description. Elias held up the warrant, reading aloud. A dangerous medical practitioner who shows reckless disregard for human life. Does that sound like anyone here? I'd like to speak. 12-year-old Jenny Miller stood, fully recovered from her bout with scarlet fever. She walked to the front, her legs straight and strong, the same leg Margaret had saved at the ranch. You're looking for someone who hurt people. Jenny faced the detective with a child's unwavering honesty. Doctor, Margaret only heals. She saved my pa's ranch hand. She saved me and half the other kids in town when the fever came. You've got the wrong person, mister. Ellen Miller stood next. Dr. Winters worked 18-hour days during the outbreak, never asking for payment, never stopping until every child was safe. She delivered my grandson when the birth went wrong, called out Mrs. Martinez from the back. One by one, they stood, Sam Henderson on crutches, his leg healing perfectly. The minister's wife, free from pain for the first time in years. Parents of children who'd survived scarlet fever. Each testified not just to Margaret's medical skill, but to her compassion, dedication, and selflessness. Marcus Hayes rose last, commanding attention through his position and bearing. Detective Pinkerton, you're asking us to identify a dangerous criminal who fled justice. We don't see such a person here. We see Dr. Margaret Winters, who faced down a fever outbreak that could have destroyed our town, who asked nothing for herself while giving everything to save our children. He turned to address the room. I propose a vote. All who see the woman described in this warrant, a dangerous, reckless practitioner, raise your hands. Not a single hand rose. Pinkerton stood isolated in a sea of crossed arms and determined faces. All who see only Dr. Margaret Winters, physician of Sage Creek, raise your hands. Every hand in the room shot up, including some from people standing outside, watching through windows. Hayes turned back to Pinkerton. The town has spoken. We see no one here matching your description. This is obstruction of justice. Pinkerton said coldly. "This is community justice," Elias corrected, stepping down from the bar. "And I'll add this warning: if you attempt to take Dr. Winters without local authorization, you'll be arrested for kidnapping. The territorial marshal in Denver is a personal friend. He takes a dim view of bounty hunters exceeding their authority." Pinkerton's jaw worked as he calculated options. He was one man in a hostile town, hundreds of miles from backup, facing a unified community that would clearly protect Margaret with force if necessary. "The evening train, detective," Elias said quietly. "I'll escort you to the depot myself." As Pinkerton gathered his documents, Margaret spoke once more. "Tell the Aldridge family I'm sorry for their loss. Truly. But also tell them that their husband and father received the best care possible under impossible circumstances. His death was tragedy, not malpractice." The detective left without another word, the town parting to let him pass but closing ranks behind him. Elias followed, true to his word about escorting him to the depot. As the saloon erupted in celebration, Margaret found herself surrounded by embracing arms, tearful thanks, and fierce promises of protection. Adelaide pushed through to wrap her in a motherly hug. "You're ours now," Adelaide said firmly. "Let them try to take you." "I'll shave up on white." And when Elias returned from the depot, having watched the train disappear into the distance, he found Margaret in her office. She was sitting at Dr. Morrison's old desk, her desk now reading a telegram that had just arrived. "From Judge Harrison," she said, voice shaking slightly. "He's convened a review board in Chicago, based on new evidence and testimony. They're considering reinstating my license and clearing all charges. He says Hoffman and Cromwell's recent censures have changed the medical board's perspective." Elias crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. "You see, truth wins eventually." "The town stood for me," she whispered against his chest. "Every single person. Because you stood for them first. You earned their loyalty through service, Margaret, through courage." She pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy, relief, and overwhelming gratitude. "I really am home, aren't I?" "You're home," he confirmed, wiping her tears gently. "And you're never leaving, not if Sage Creek has anything to say about it." Outside, the town continued its celebration. The Liberty Saloon had reopened properly, drinks flowing freely in honor of their doctor's victory. Someone started playing a fiddle, and soon dancing spilled into the street. But in the quiet of the medical office, Margaret and Elias simply held each other, understanding that they'd won more than a legal battle. They'd proven that community could triumph over bureaucracy, that loyalty could overcome law, and that sometimes frontier justice was the truest justice of all. The reckoning had come and gone. Margaret had faced her past and found it powerless against her present, a present filled with purpose, community, and love. The shadows that had chased her from Chicago had been burned away by the fierce light of Sage Creek's protection. She was no longer Margaret Winters, fugitive. She was Dr. Margaret Winters of Sage Creek, Colorado Territory, and she was finally, truly free. The wedding could come now. The future Elias had promised, the life they'd both dreamed of during those long nights of vigilance and healing. The town had made its choice, and that choice was love over law, healing over harm, and community over everything else. The April morning dawned clear and brilliant, the mountains wearing caps of late snow while the valley burst with wildflowers. 6 months had passed since Detective Pinkerton left on the evening train. 6 months of Margaret working openly as Sage Creek's physician. 6 months of courtship conducted under the watchful, approving eyes of the entire town. Adelaide's boarding house had transformed into a beehive of activity. Women who'd once viewed Margaret with suspicion now fussed over her wedding dress, Adelaide's own ivory silk from 20 years past, carefully altered and refreshed with new lace at the collar and cuffs. Ellen Miller worked orange blossoms from the Hartley greenhouse into an elegant bouquet, while Mrs. Martinez embroidered a delicate blue handkerchief for the traditional something blue. Hold still, Adelaide commanded, adjusting the dress's hem one final time. Lord knows I never thought I'd see this dress worn again, but it's been waiting for the right occasion. Margaret stood before the mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The woman who'd arrived at the depot 8 months ago, exhausted, frightened, alone, had vanished. In her place stood someone radiant with happiness, surrounded by women who'd become sisters, mothers, daughters, in all but blood. You're glowing, Jenny Miller said from her perch on the bed. At 13 now, she'd appointed herself chief assistant for wedding preparations, her recovered leg carrying her on countless errands. Every bride glows, Margaret replied, but her smile acknowledged the deeper truth. She was glowing with belonging, with purpose, with the knowledge that she'd found her place in the world. A knock at the door interrupted the feminine gathering. Ladies, Marcus Hayes called through the wood, the church is ready, and the groom's about to wear a hole in the floor with his pacing. The banker had undergone his own transformation since his son's recovery from scarlet fever. The man who'd once demanded to know who authorized Margaret's medical practice had become one of her fiercest advocates, even organizing the town petition that had helped restore her medical license 3 months prior. Tell Elias 5 more minutes, Adelaide called back, pinning the last orange blossom in Margaret's carefully arranged hair. Outside, the children Margaret had saved during the fever outbreak had spent the morning gathering armfuls of April wildflowers, Indian paintbrush, columbines, wild roses. They'd woven them into garlands that now decorated the church's simple interior, transforming the modest building into a cathedral of color and fragrance. The church itself was testament to Sage Creek's community spirit, built just 2 years prior through collective labor, every family contributing what they could: lumber, nails, windows, or simply willing hands. Today, it overflowed with those same families, dressed in their finest, faces bright with anticipation. Elias stood at the altar in his best black suit, a simple gold band burning a hole in his pocket. Beside him, Judge Harrison from Chicago, who'd made the long journey to perform the ceremony as his final gift to Margaret's vindication, offered reassuring smiles. Sam Henderson, fully recovered and walking without crutches now, had insisted on standing as Elias's best man, declaring it small repayment for a saved leg. When the church doors opened and Margaret appeared on Marcus Hayes's arm, a collective sigh ran through the congregation. She moved with grace down the aisle, her eyes locked on Elias's, Adelaide following as matron of honor. The children who'd gathered flowers now scattered petals in her path, their faces beaming with pride at their contribution. "Who gives this woman to be married?" Judge Harrison asked when Margaret reached the altar. "Her community does," Marcus Hayes replied, departing from tradition. "With joy and blessing." A murmur of agreement rippled through the church. They were all giving her away and claiming her simultaneously, this woman who'd become the heart of their town. Judge Harrison smiled at the adaptation. "Then let us begin. Dearly beloved, we gather today to witness something remarkable, not just the union of 2 people, but the culmination of a journey from isolation to belonging, from fear to courage, from solitude to love." Margaret handed her bouquet to Adelaide and took Elias's hands. They trembled slightly, but his grip was steady, anchoring. "Margaret," Judge Harrison continued, "you came to Sage Creek seeking sanctuary and gave healing in return. Elias, you offered protection and found partnership. Together, you've shown this community that love isn't just about 2 people, it's about choosing to serve something greater than yourselves." When it came time for vows, Margaret spoke first, her voice clear and strong. "Elias, you saw me when I was invisible, believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. You stood between me and my fears, offered shelter when I had nowhere to turn. I promise to stand beside you through whatever comes, to heal not just bodies but hearts, to serve this town that has become our family. I promise to love you with the same steadfast faith you showed me, from this day forward, in sickness and health, through drought and plenty, until my last breath." Elias had to clear his throat twice before he could speak. "Margaret, you brought light into darkness I didn't even know I was living in. 8 years I spent just existing, going through motions, until you stepped off that train and reminded me what it meant to truly live. I promise to protect not just your safety but your dreams, to support your calling as a healer, to stand with you against any storm. I promise to love you with gratitude for every day you choose to stay, from this moment until forever, no matter what shadows try to find us. The rings were simple gold bands, purchased from the jewelry maker in Denver, but engraved locally with intertwining caduceus and Sheriff's Star Medicine and Law United. As they exchanged them, several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. "By the authority vested in me by the territory of Colorado," Judge Harrison declared, his own voice thick with emotion, "I pronounce you husband and wife. Sheriff Holt, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was tender, brief, appropriate for the setting but promising more in private. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, the church erupted in celebration. Children whooped, men whistled, women applauded with tears streaming down their faces. But Elias held up his hand for silence. "Before we celebrate, I have a wedding gift for my wife." He led Margaret outside where the entire town followed. There, in front of the medical office, stood a new sign professionally painted, gleaming in the April sun. Dr. Margaret Winters Holt, physician. Below it, in smaller letters, licensed by the Territory of Colorado Medical Board. Margaret pressed her fingers to her lips, tears flowing freely. The sign represented everything: acceptance, vindication, belonging, future. "The town commissioned it," Marcus Hayes announced. "But there's more." They led her inside the office where she gasped. New medical instruments lined the shelves: surgical tools, microscope, medicines she'd only dreamed of having. A brass plaque on the desk read, "Presented to Dr. Margaret Winters Holt by the grateful citizens of Sage Creek." "We all contributed," Ellen Miller explained. "Every family gave what they could. It's our wedding gift and our thank you." The reception spilled from the church into the street, tables groaning under the weight of contributed dishes. Every family had brought their best fried chicken, beef stew, cornbread, preserves, pies, and cakes. The honey cake from the minister's wife held the place of honor, decorated with sugared violets and orange blossoms. Elderflower cordial flowed alongside stronger drinks for the men. As the sun set, fiddle and harmonica music filled the air. Elias and Margaret led the first dance, a simple waltz that turned into something more as the whole town joined in. Children darted between dancing couples. Elderly matrons taught young women old steps, and even the most stoic ranchers found themselves pulled into the celebration. "Look at them," Adelaide said to Marcus Hayes as they watched Margaret teaching Jenny Miller a Scottish reel Elias had just taught her. 8 months ago, she was a frightened woman at a train depot. Now she's the soul of this town. "The sheriff knew," Marcus replied. "Somehow, he saw what she could become. Or maybe," Adelaide suggested, "he saw who she always was." The dancing continued until dawn, stories already growing with each retelling. How the mysterious woman at the depot had turned out to be a brilliant doctor. How the sheriff had protected her against Chicago detectives. How love had bloomed during a fever outbreak. By the time these stories reached the next generation, they'd be legend, the stuff of frontier mythology. But one scene played out away from the celebration, a quiet coda to the day's joy. As the first light of their wedding dawn touched the mountains, Margaret found herself in her medical office with someone unexpected, a young woman named Catherine Porter, the minister's 18-year-old daughter. Dr. Winters Holt, Catherine said shyly. "I wanted to speak with you alone." "What is it?" "Catherine, I want to learn medicine. I watched you during the fever outbreak, saw how you saved those children. I want to do that, to be like you." Margaret studied the girl's earnest face, remembering her own desperate desire to heal, to learn, to serve. "It's not an easy path, especially for a woman. But you did it." "I did." And perhaps that means you can too. Margaret moved to her medical bag, pulling out a basic anatomy text. We'll start with this. Come by 3 afternoons a week after your household duties. I'll teach you what I know. Catherine clutched the book like a treasure. You mean it. Every healer needs to pass on their knowledge. Besides, Margaret smiled, thinking of the future stretching ahead. Sage Creek is growing. One doctor won't be enough forever. As Catherine left with her precious book, Margaret stood in her office, their office now, hers and the town's. Through the window, she could see Elias helping to clear tables from the celebration, his movements easy and content. He caught her eye and smiled, a private moment amid public aftermath. 10 years from now, the Sage Creek Historical Society would record that Dr. Margaret Winters Holt established the territory's first teaching clinic, that she and Sheriff Elias Holt raised 3 children while serving their community tirelessly. They'd note how the lamp she kept burning in the clinic window became known as Hope's Light, a beacon for all seeking healing and second chances. But that was future history. For now, there was just this: a woman who'd found home, a man who'd found love again, a town that had chosen compassion over convention, and a wedding day that had united them all in celebration of what frontier life could be at its best, a place where broken people came together to build something whole, where strangers became family, and where love conquered fear every single time. Margaret closed the office and walked toward her husband, her hand finding his as naturally as breathing. Together. They headed home, not to the boarding house, but to the small frame house Elias had been secretly preparing for months, complete with a room for medical books and another for the children they both hoped would come. Behind them, the sun rose fully over Sage Creek, painting the valley gold. The wedding was over, but their life together, their real life, built on truth and trust and the fierce loyalty of an entire town, had just begun. You know, friend, as I sit here remembering Margaret and Elias's story, I find myself thinking about the families we're born into and the ones we choose. Margaret arrived in Sage Creek with nothing but fear and a medical bag. Yet she discovered something I reckon we all need to understand: that gratitude isn't just saying thank you. It's what we do with the second chances life offers us. She could have kept running, could have hidden her gift and lived safe but small. Instead, she chose to heal, even when it meant exposure. And in return, Sage Creek didn't just protect her, they claimed her as their own. That's the thing about real family: it's not always blood that binds us. Sometimes it's the gratitude we show through action, the way we stand up for each other when the world comes calling with its warrants and judgments. Elias knew this truth. He'd lost his first family, could have shut his heart forever. But gratitude for life itself opened him to love again. The town knew it too. Every person who stood in that saloon, raising their hand for Margaret, was saying thank you the only way that mattered, with loyalty. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? Who might we become family to if we just showed up with gratitude and courage?